Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're watching. We welcome you on another edition of the Heretics podcast on Putin TV. Hope you joined us after yesterday's great roundtable that we had with Larry Johnson, Andrei Martyanov, and Mike Mihailovich. Today, we're hosting the one, the only Scott Ritter. And Scott literally has jumped ship. He was just doing the Scott Ritter show and a very interesting discussion, which ended on a note of literally information is power. It was a very enlightening discussion. I hope we'll touch upon some of those themes during our interview today. Scott, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. I got to express, I'm a little angry to find out you had such a fantastic roundtable the other day, and I wasn't invited. I mean, I would have loved to have been part of that. I'm joking about being angry, but I'm jealous that you had the opportunity to talk to people of that caliber. That's awesome.
No, it was a really hope YouTube doesn't censor this. It was a really kick-ass discussion, but I'm obliged now, so expect an invitation coming soon
Oh dear.
to a roundtable. I saw the one with you and Andrei Martyanov, so that was sort of an inspiration. It really was a very deep dive yesterday. We did over 90 minutes, so it was really good. Scott, today I want to focus a little bit on an orthodox way because usually when you're interviewed, everybody starts off with Ukraine, Russia, but I want to start off today with an anniversary, which is coming up, which is the 20th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. And you were a very important figure leading up to the events in Iraq. And before I get down into the questions, I want to take a trip down memory lane. So, Łukasz, if we can put up the...
I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone, or to take the nation to war partway, or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip, because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector, you didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works.
I have stated clearly that in the course of my work as a weapons inspector, I was involved in liaison activity with a number of governments, to include the United States and Israel, and that the nature of this relationship was of an intelligence, in terms of intelligence work. But it was intelligence work that was fully authorized by my chain of command. That chain of command was within the United Nations. I never initiated anything that wasn't approved by the executive chairman and wasn't in total conformity with our disarmament mandate put forward by the Security Council. We have somebody who has a unique insight to the situation, that is myself, and we have formed a production film team, and indeed a news gathering film team, to come to Iraq for the purpose of legitimate journalism. Now, the United States government has let it be known that they do not necessarily agree with how I have characterized this team. And before our departure, there were efforts to, I frankly say, intimidate us not to come to Iraq. We received a very interesting letter from the Office of Foreign Assets Control from the Department of Treasury, telling us that we could be subjected to imprisonment up to 12 years, fines of over $1 million, and other civil penalties if we came to Iraq. And frankly speaking, as a nation who has an inherently contradictory policy towards Iraq, on the one hand saying Iraq should be disarmed, meaning sanctions would be lifted, but on the other hand saying sanctions will never be lifted until the president of Iraq is removed from power. The U.S. needs to get its act together. The U.S. needs to articulate a policy that is in conformity with international law, a policy that allows for this issue to be moved forward, a policy that has a chance of success.
Scott, as you watched that, some reflections on the occasion of the 20th anniversary. What were your thoughts when you saw yourself back in the day, so to say, in front of Joe Biden and in Iraq at that crucial time before the invasion?
Well, I mean, the hearing, Joe Biden doesn't like to talk about context. That hearing took place in September of 1998 at the request of the United States Senate. It was a historic event because it was the first time that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the Senate Armed Forces Committee met in joint session to discuss an issue like this. They were supposed to have three people before them that day. Me, a simple weapons inspector, operating well above my pay grade, apparently. But the people who were going to sit next to me was Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State, and Mr. Cohen, the Secretary of Defense. Now, why would a simple weapons inspector be asked to come before a unique, esteemed body, a joint session of the Foreign Relations and Armed Services Committee, which up until that time had never in their history come together? So something's big here. So why would I be invited to join the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense to discuss this issue? Because I knew more than they did. I knew the same things they did. I sat in the same briefings they did. And with all due respect to Joe Biden, I belonged right where I was. He was just trying to denigrate it. It wasn't me that backed away from the hearing. It was the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense that didn't show up. Why? Because they knew what I knew. They knew that I knew everything they knew. They knew that I was there when they made the decisions. They knew I knew their promises. They knew that I knew their betrayals. I could name dates, times, names. I had the documents. And they would have been condemned in front of the United States Senate and the American people. They backed away. I went there, and my presence was extraordinarily uncomfortable for Democrats like Joe Biden, who were extraordinarily loyal to the Democratic president, Bill Clinton. So his job was to tear me down, to take me down. And that's what you saw. That was his effort. It failed. What people need to know, the rest of the story is he was lambasted in the media after that. Op-eds in the Washington Post and New York Times everywhere said, "How dare you speak to me like this, speak to Scott Ritter like this?" And he asked me to come to his office. We had a 45-minute one-on-one where he apologized. He published a letter of apology in the Washington Post. And he promised to work with me going forward. He lied, of course, because going forward, when I asked to engage him, he wouldn't meet with me. He sent his chief of staff, who in a very uncomfortable meeting for him, called me a traitor to my face, accused me of treason, saying I should be arrested. And when I remind him that you don't tell former Marines that to their face, or else you run the risk of losing your teeth, and I'm willing to have him apply for a pair of dentures right now, he backed down and he apologized. But the point is, Joe Biden has never been honest about this issue. He's always been in favor of a conflict with Iraq, and he got what it wanted. The second thing that you showed was my trip in the summer of 2000, when I went to Iraq to make a documentary film, part of what turned out to be a campaign of efforts on my part to prevent a war, to gather information, package this information, and get it to the American public to make a case against war based upon the lie of weapons of mass destruction. So I went to Iraq, again, at great risk. They were threatening to throw me in jail, throw the keys away, and that's it. And I told them that just isn't going to happen. There's a thing called the United States Constitution, and I won. But they, when I came back from Iraq, they pulled me aside. They put me in the room. The people come in, and the threats are made. And I told them, pound sand, either arrest me or move aside. Either way, we're going to court over a First Amendment thing. I'm a journalist. Get out of the way. And they, of course, moved out of the way. But they harassed me the whole time. It brought back memories of that. I mean, it was an ugly time to be an American, to be for sure, especially an American trying to do that which any American in my position should have done, and I believe would have done. When you are uniquely empowered with information that proves the lie of the policies of your government, you have a duty and responsibility to step up and speak truth to power. I remind every American listening right now that the government works for us. We don't work for the government. That I took an oath to the Constitution, not to the government. So people are like, you're an American. How could you go against your government? When my government is operating in a manner which violates the letter intent of the law, which violates the principles we stand for as a nation, which violates the Constitution, when they operate in a manner which impedes my constitutional rights to speak out as a citizen. Because you know what's more important than the government of the United States? We, the people of the United States. That's how the Constitution begins. It doesn't begin, we, the government of the United States. It's we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. And so the government is supposed to represent us to help create this more perfect union. Government failed on Iraq. And if you'd shown further clips, you would have seen, me travel to Iraq the next year to speak to the Iraqi parliament. First foreigner ever to do that. At great risk, threatened by the FBI again, called a known enemy of the state by Sandy Berger, the national security advisor. Had the FBI had a senior CIA person tell me straight up to my face that if I go there, the FBI is going to, and I won't use the word because you don't want to get banned, but do something to me in some place. Use your imagination. And, and just on and on and on. So this anniversary, it's like a nightmare for me. I mean, I have to tell you, when I was speaking in Southern California, again, trying to get public awareness about this. And on my flight back, I was transiting through Detroit, I believe. And as I'm walking through the airport, right there on TV, the war's beginning. And it was the most crushing blow that I could imagine, because even though it wasn't my fault, I felt like I had failed, that, I had been cursed or blessed or whatever you want to say with unique information because of a 7-year unique experience as a chief weapons inspector in Iraq. I knew the truth, and somehow I wasn't able to articulate the truth sufficiently to get enough momentum to oppose this war. We went to war on a lie, and thousands of Americans lost their lives, hundreds of thousands of Iraqis lost their lives, and the entire world has never been the same since then. So it's a tough anniversary. I mean, it's been 20 years, but it brings back pretty bad memories.
I can imagine, because first of all, when I watched you sitting in front of Biden, it sort of reminded me of that scene from The Godfather where they're mocking Michael Corleone, but he's just sitting there, taking it nicely. So I admire your posture. It was very serious, and you commanded yourself well. But just going back to the time just before the invasion, I mean, obviously the start of the war was very tragic. I personally also remember the night when it started. I was listening to everything on the radio that night, couldn't sleep. I took part in anti-war demonstrations, even though I was 17 years old at that time. We had some in Toronto, and I was still stationed back in Canada. It was the first time, actually, I took part in an anti-war demonstration, even though I'm a fairly conservative person, with Marxists and Leninists, which is kind of interesting. But that's kind of the thing that unites people when you're against war. You have these exotic coalitions, but the aim and the goal is very noble. But Scott, I mean, just from the intelligence perspective, it also must have been, a blow when you were watching Colin Powell, who you knew personally, presenting the so-called evidence, curveball and all, at the United Nations. Did you happen to watch that live, or you knew already that it was going to be a bunch of, BS being presented at the UN?
Well, I mean, I was actually in Japan at the time, again, trying to stop a war by speaking to the Japanese parliament to try and convince them not to support their government's, signing on to this war coalition. And I was scheduled to speak to the Foreign Correspondents Association of Tokyo that night, and we delayed it so I could familiarize myself with the thing. But I had given an interview the day before with the largest media outlet in Japan. And I predicted exactly what was going to happen because it's imminently predictable. I said, this is what Colin Powell is going to try to do, Interesting thing about transcripts is, they either come back to haunt you or you're proud of them. I'm proud of all the transcripts I did during that period of time. And that one especially, because I called it out. And then Colin Powell spoke, and I addressed it immediately. And I said, everything he said was a lie. Everything he said was a lie. And it's true. There's not a single word he said in there that was the truth. He deliberately spun. And you can't get it that wrong by accident, which meant that Colin Powell knew. And we now know that he knew that he was not telling the truth. He admits to certain concerns about this, that, and the other thing. He should have done a better job of vetting. Hey, Colin, former national security advisor, don't tell me you don't know how the system works. Former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, don't tell me you don't know how the system works. Current Secretary of State, Don't tell me you don't know how the system works. You didn't get used by the system. You used the system. You allowed yourself to be used by the system. And in doing so, you destroyed the reputation of a man whom I held in high regard. I don't have to agree with policy decisions that Colin Powell would make. It's above my pay grade. I've been told that before. But
And you don't have the limousine. You don't have the limousine.
Well, no, I don't have anything close to a limousine. But I respect. First of all, this is a man whom supported the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty when I was when I was doing that job. He was a big proponent of it. Helped backstop the ratification process. So I'm grateful to him for that. That's when he was National Security Advisor. When he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during the Gulf War, he backed me up in a controversy I had with Norman Schwarzkopf, where Schwarzkopf was trying to take credit for Scud kills. I was the battle damage assessment officer, and I said no Scuds were killed. And we got in a little bit of a fight. And when a captain fights a four-star general, it turns out bad for the captain 100% of the time. So I was fired. But when my report went back up the chain, the J2, the Joint Chiefs, Mike McMullen, brought it to Colin Powell, and Colin Powell called Schwarzkopf and hashed it out and told him that I happened to be right on this one, and I got my job back. But and he did that. And then as a weapons inspector, he was there for us. We, early on, the CIA tried to kick me and two Army officers out because we were all experienced inspectors. We wrote the book on on-site inspection when we were in the 1980s, and now we were brought into the United Nations because we knew more about on-site inspection than anybody in the entire world. And so we're played a heavy role influencing the direction that the United Nations is going, which is not the direction the CIA wants to take it. And the CIA was conspiring to get all three of us kicked off the United Nations. And Colin Powell intervened and put a halt to that. So I have nothing but the highest regard for Colin Powell in terms of his integrity. But then that night, it was just tragic to watch him throw it all away to tell lies that, here's a guy in his book, he promised, My American Journey, he promised, because of the experience of the Vietnam War, that never again would he be silent in the face of deliberate lies designed to lead us down the path towards a war that should be avoided at all costs. Well, Iraq was a war that should have been avoided at all costs, and we're going to war based upon deliberate lies being told. And he proved to be a hypocrite. He proved to be somebody who could not live up to the standard he set for himself. He told a lie before the Security Council. That lie, told in the person of Colin Powell, gave that lie credence. There are op-eds that were written afterwards saying, we are now believers in the war because of Colin Powell. Up until then, we had suspicions. But when Colin Powell came out and did this, the gravitas, the seriousness, the credibility, the integrity of the man made us convinced the war is ready to fight. Well, good job, Colin. I mean, he's dead now, so not allowed to say bad things about the dead. But, he's singularly responsible for this war going forward. He could have taken the principled stand that he claimed he wanted to take and say, not just, hell no, I'm not giving that speech, but I'm submitting a letter of resignation right now. I'm going before the American people to tell them that this war is being fought on a bodyguard of lies. That could have stopped the conflict. And imagine how many thousands of American parents, how many wives, how many children would have their husbands, their sons, their brothers home today alive, being viable members of society. And remember, the Iraq War set off a series of events that destabilized the entire Middle East. So pretty much every act of violence that has occurred since then is because of the trigger set by the war. So it's not just American lives. How many millions of Iraqis could enjoy their loved ones today? How many hundreds of thousands of Syrians, Yemenis, Iranians, people who would be alive today if it weren't for Colin Powell's lie?
Yeah. And I mean, Vladimir Putin, when he addresses the Russians or even the world in major speeches, but about 80% of his speeches, when he talks about international issues, he always mentions Iraq, which is a sort of flashpoint that began, got things rolling. It sort of showed to him, at least, that, there's something about the West that I'm starting to see that I didn't see before. And it's something sick and it's something deranged. It's interesting, Scott. I remember watching that speech live also. And, you had Colin Powell sitting there, and right behind him, you had the director of the CIA. What was his name? George Tenet. George Tenet, right. He makes his own excuses in his book, At the Center of the Storm, that, he as a director of the CIA wasn't informed, blah, blah, blah. But it's funny how after 20 years, we're seeing the exact same thing. You have Joe Biden or the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken. Well, they're not making a speech, but symbolically, Bill Burns is right there behind him. And if what Seymour Hersh has written about Nord Stream 2 is true, and I have no doubt that it is true, we're seeing the same dynamic, the same paradigm. You know, the feckless CIA standing behind the president and not providing him with uncomfortable intelligence, but going along with the program. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Again, I'm just a junior guy. It's all above my pay grade. So I understand where I'm coming from. But the first thing I was taught in intelligence officer school, back then we called it amphibious intelligence course, was that my job wasn't to make my boss happy. Not my job. My job was to put the uncomfortable truth in front of my boss, and then he and the S3, the operations officer, and others in the staff, including myself, would try to figure out what do we do with this information? How do we come up with the appropriate course of action to deal with ground truth? I was taught that if you lie, Marines die, plain and simple. Don't fudge things. Just because the boss is putting a lot of pressure on you because he has a preferred course of action doesn't mean you go out and shape the intelligence so that it meets that. You give the boss the hard truth. And if the hard truth means that that's a bad course of action, so be it. Everybody suck it up and adapt and overcome. But you never lie as an intelligence officer. You never lie. You never tolerate a lie. And I have to say that, I had the opportunity to practice my art in real world situations. And I never once lied. And the system, the Marine system would never tolerate. I found during the Gulf War, as I talked about earlier about the Scud kill issue, that no, I mean, there was pressure. I was ordered to tell a lie, straight up ordered to tell a lie. And I refused to do so, refused to put my name on a document, and I was fired for that job. And they were going to prosecute me because refusing a direct order in a time of war is a big deal. But fortunately, the system backed me up, and they realized that intelligence officers telling the truth is sort of what we want. We don't want intelligence officers that fold under pressure and doctor the data. But we saw in the lead up to this war, I mean, we saw Donald Rumsfeld's Pentagon create a special unit with Douglas Feith as the head of it, and their sole purpose was cherry pick intelligence information and wrap it up and package it in a way that met the policy objectives of the Bush administration. And we know that that was the intent because George Bush and Tony Blair had a meeting in I think in September of 2002, and a British intelligence official was there. David Mann was a diplomat, but the man who ran British intelligence, and he wrote a memorandum.
Breedlove, I think, was his name, possibly.
Yes, Breedlove, and he's basically said we've been asked to fix the intelligence to the conclusion. That means you've been asked to lie, and people die because of that. So I take a look at U.S. intelligence, and we have example after example. James Clapper, he admits straight up that that when he was the head of the it used to be the National Imagery. Gosh, I get old.
Responsible for the satellites. Yeah.
Well, no, that's the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office. But basically, the people who do the imagery interpretation, they worked out of the Naval Yard in D.C. But it became the National Geospatial Imagery Mapping Agency. They got it all, and he pretty much basically said, we went in there and we reinterpreted the images to see what our bosses wanted us to see. Hey, Clapper, I've done imagery analysis my entire adult life, especially professionally. I've done analysis of all the sensor data. You can't go in and reinterpret it. Okay, it tells you what it tells you. There's you went in and doctored it, is what you're saying. You went in and you excluded certain data, you emphasized other data, and you told a lie. And he did, and he should have been court-martialed for it. I mean, he was a serving officer. He's now admitted basically violating his oath and telling a lie, and people died. If you, I was a firefighter here in town, and if you get a situation in a fire scene, let's say as an arsonist, you set a building on fire, and I respond, and somebody on my crew dies, you're charged with murder. You're charged with murder. Clapper should be charged with murder. He killed Americans by lying. Tenet should be charged with murder. He killed people by lying. And Burns has to be careful here, because if he is continuing to tell lies of this nature, or promulgate lies, or support lies, or somehow allow anything other than the total truth to be presented to the president, then he's guilty of crimes as well. Intelligence is a dark business. I'm not pretending that it's a business for for saints and all. It's not, especially human intelligence. So you got to do some pretty dark things to get people to betray their country and to control them. But as an analyst, not as an operator, but as an analyst, it's as easy as it gets, guys. You're in a desk in a building. Usually you have air conditioning because you have computers. If it's cold, you got heat. Generally, they have some donuts for you to eat and some Diet Coke or coffee to drink. You ain't at war. It's not hard. All you have to do is engage the brain that you've been trained to do and tell the damn truth. That's all you have to do. But somehow we don't do it. We have people like Phil Mudd. Phil Mudd's on TV all the time with CNN, counterterrorism guy. He got the highest CIA award for analysis for telling a lie. They rewarded a liar, and they knew he was lying because they ordered him to lie. He's one of the guys that went in and slipped data into Colin Powell's speech. Talk to Larry Wilkerson about it, about the interactions he had with Phil Mudd, as Phil Mudd slipped in data that linked Saddam Hussein to Al-Qaeda, even though everybody knew there was no linkage. But Phil Mudd did it. He's a liar. Not only that, he's a murderer, because that lie led to a war, just like an arsonist fire led to the fire department showing up. And if somebody dies, you got to be held to account. But in America today, we give Phil Mudd total access to CNN. Everybody nods their head and said, he's a wonderful expert. Clapper can speak. Negroponte can speak. And when William Burns retires, he can speak. Pardon?
Brennan can speak.
Brennan can speak. They all can speak. They're all liars. They've all betrayed their oaths. And, it is what it is.
Yeah. Scott, so I'm going to utilize your intelligence skills now, because I'm going to give you a piece of news from Poland, which I read today, and I couldn't ignore it. But there was information today on the Polish official news service, our sort of state-run Reuters, that, I quote, "The trial of a woman accused of praising Russian aggression against Ukraine has begun. She has published posts on Facebook to that effect." If you go down deeper into the article, it states basically that in May or April, she made comments on Facebook praising the intervention in Ukraine, the war, talking about Slavic unity and how Vladimir Putin is defending, Slavic Dom, or the Slavic countries from Western degeneration and so on. So basically, whether you agree or not, exercising her free speech in line with the Polish constitution, all the charters that Poland has signed up to as a member of the European Union, and so on. But from your perspective, and knowing the geopolitical position that Poland is in right now, and the stance we have taken vis-a-vis Ukraine, why do you think the Polish government is tightening its noose and actually changing laws whereby you are now not allowed to comment positively on a so-called aggression against Ukraine from the side of Russia? That's illegal in Poland right now. If you say it publicly, if you say it on social media in explicit terms. Why do you think the government in Poland would be doing this?
Because they're afraid. They're afraid of the truth. Look, if you believe something and you believe the facts are on your side, you're not afraid of the counter argument. I mean, I've always told people I take some very strong positions, but I'll debate you anytime, any place, anywhere, because my goal isn't to win by telling a lie or having the wrong data. My goal is to win by telling the truth and having the right data. And if through the process of a debate, dialogue, and discussion, I'm proven wrong, that you have better information, I want that. That's my goal. That's my objective. I view debates as a mechanism of gathering information, not something to be afraid of. So when you hear somebody say, well, we're going to shut that down. Why? Why would you shut that down? Here in the United States, we have free speech, the First Amendment, the constitutional rights, but we allow people like David Duke, the head of the Ku Klux Klan, a grand wizard, to speak freely. He can publish things on the internet. He can do anything he wants. Why do we let that happen? Because we're not afraid of David Duke, because we're confident that at the end of the day, when his information is out there, rational people, when evaluating it, will determine that that is bad juju. We don't want to have anything to do with it. But if you're afraid of it, if you say, well, my God, if David Duke is allowed to say what he wants to say, people are going to rally around him and be against us. That means that there's a problem with your own messaging. And the best way to deal with a problem with your own messaging is get a better message, articulate it better, be a better debater, be a better presenter, but don't silence the opposition. Don't silence hateful voices. Don't silence anybody. That weakens everything about what you're trying to defend. And the fact that Poland is shutting people down, I don't know her arguments. I haven't seen them. I mean, so I can't sit here and say that I find everything she said to be yes. No.
Right.
I don't care. She should be allowed to say it. And the fact that the Polish government is shutting her down means the Polish government is afraid of something. They're afraid that if she's allowed to articulate this, that what she's saying might resonate with a significant number of people in Poland who might begin to question the policies being made by their elected officials. And the elected officials aren't willing to answer those questions. You know, a government official who's carrying out sound policy that is for the genuine benefit of, you know, the majority of the population, should never hesitate to step forward and articulate why they're doing what they're doing. That's sort of what you're supposed to do as an elected official. Be open and transparent with the people about what's going on. But if you're sneaky, or if what you're doing is a lie, if you're actually doing something that's bad and you've already lied to the people about it, told them it's this, but it's this, the last thing you want is somebody to come up who initiates a conversation that will expose the lie, so you shut it down. And that's what the Polish government, in my opinion, is doing. They're shutting down someone who threatens them because they can't handle what she's saying, and they can't handle it because, generally speaking, it probably deviates from the reality that or the perception that they're trying to create about, you know, I don't know whether the Ukrainian government's good, Putin's bad. I mean, you know, it's that simple. Zelensky good, Putin's bad. Wow. And now she's coming out saying Zelensky's bad, Putin's good, and she might be putting some more data in there. And they're saying we don't want to have that discussion because if we do, it might turn out that Zelensky's bad and Putin's good. So we're going to shut it down and we're going to keep embracing the basic lie. Zelensky good, Putin bad.
It's like the Polish government wants to be a Jack Nicholson. The truth, you can't handle the truth.
Can't handle the truth.
Indeed, literally. Scott, a lot of people contend, I think it was the prime minister of one of the Baltic countries, that Vladimir Putin has no right to exit or cancel Russia's participation in the New START treaty. A lot of people are stating that his statement made last week in that speech on Tuesday, I believe it was before Biden's speech in Warsaw, just proves that he's a madman and he's preparing for general nuclear war. I want to hear your take on the cancellation of Russia in New START.
Well, you know, Ray McGovern is a old CIA analyst. When I say old, I mean veteran, and he's getting a little gray in his beard. But I love Ray McGovern. We're good friends, and you know, he used to, you know, be one of the top Soviet analysts in the CIA. So good that he was he briefed the presidential daily brief to the most elite document. He briefed senior officials, the vice president, the secretary of defense, and others. And he has been a good mentor. And he said something that's very interesting, that the best way to learn about what Soviet leaders and Russian leaders are thinking and doing is to listen to them. Listen to them. They'll tell you. They're not like American politicians who lie through their teeth. They actually come out and sort of say what they mean and mean what they say. So Putin, for some time now, has been saying that one of the great mistakes that America made was withdrawing from the anti-ballistic missile treaty. That this was problematic. He said it at the time we did it, and he's been reminding of that ever since, saying that this is an inherently destabilizing move because you're going to move forward with technologies that threaten our nuclear deterrence. You're going to build places like the missile defense place in Poland and Romania that will inhibit our ability to protect ourselves if it ever came down to a nuclear exchange. Not that we want one, but the way we deter you from attacking us is to have the capability to destroy you if you attack us. And now you're putting in place systems that help, you know, mitigate against our ability to do that. he warned us about that. In 2010, when the United States wanted to negotiate this new treaty, the New START treaty, the Russians said, "Okay, but we got to have missile defense on the table." And then the Obama administration said, "I can't get a treaty with both strategic arms reduction and missile defense through the Senate. We can only do one, and that is we're going to get the strategic arms treaty through the Senate, but we promise you that we'll engage on missile defense once we do that." And the Russians maybe naively went, "Okay, we'll take you up on that one." So they got the treaty through. And then when they tried to engage, turned out the United States lied. We lied about everything. One of the things we lied about is we said that the missile interceptors in the Polish and Romanian systems aren't capable of knocking down intercontinental ballistic missiles. They can only take out medium range missiles, like the ones that are going to be fired from Iran, but they could never engage with anyways because of range and location. Nonsense like that. And then 2 years later, they deploy a system that had been tested at the time. We knew that that system existed, the Standard Missile 3 Block 2A, which is designed to shoot down intercontinental ballistic missiles. We lied through our teeth. We lied to the Russians, and the Russians remember this lie. We lied about everything. We negotiated in bad faith. We withdrew from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. So now Russia has a situation where the last remaining arms control treaty allows the United States to gain access to the strategic systems. But in 2018, Putin gave another speech where he introduced new systems to the West. The Sarmat heavy ICBM, the Avant-Garde maneuvering thing, the Poseidon torpedo. And at the time, he said, "I warned you when you withdrew from the ABM treaty. I warned you about the consequences. Now you've gone forward, you deployed, you lied to us. So I'm deploying systems that can just defeat any ABMs, any anti-missile system you will ever have. You will never have an anti-missile system that can defeat what I just deployed here. You wouldn't listen to me back then. Are you listening now?" He said. Apparently not, because what we've done is lie. In 2020, when the pandemic came in, on mutual consent, we stopped inspections with the New START treaty because of the pandemic. You can't have people traveling around, all that stuff. In spring of last year, 2022, the agreement was they were going to begin inspections again. Yeah. But then Russia made its move on Ukraine, and the European Union passed sanctions which deny Russia overflight of their territory. For Russian inspectors to get to the United States, they have to overfly European territory, and now they can't, which means they can't get their inspectors to the United States. And then the United States turns around and says, "Well, we want to send our inspectors to Russia." And the Russians went, "Time out, reciprocity. If we can't go inspect, you can't go inspect. So there's not going to be any inspections." Then the United States said, "Well, let's talk about this through what's called the Bilateral Consultative Committee, the BCC, the Treaty Framework for Discussions, meets twice a year. It had been suspended by COVID, but now they want to get it back up. They were supposed to meet in Geneva, but Russia said the Swiss aren't neutral anymore, so that's not a neutral site. It was agreed they're going to meet in Cairo, end of November. The U.S. was getting ready to go, and the Russians pulled the plug. Why? What the Russians said is following, and they said this in November, and Putin repeated it in his February 21st address. Listen to what they say, because their system is the day is long. He said, "You've built the ABM treaty to give yourselves a singular advantage. That is the ability to shoot down our missiles. I warned you about that. So now we've deployed missiles that could defeat that. And now you want to inspect those sites at a time when you've said you want to bring on the strategic defeat of Russia. Why in God's name, if that is indeed your goal, the strategic defeat of Russia, would we allow you access to the weapon systems that we had to build to defeat your missile defense systems because you withdrew from a treaty? It isn't going to work that way, guys. As long as you have a strategic objective of defeating Russia, destroying Russia, we are done with this. Now, we're not going to cheat. We're not going to, start building missiles and violating, but we're suspending inspections. We're suspending notifications. We're suspending the bilateral consultative commission. We're suspending the treaty. And that's where we're at. Then they also said some interesting things. If you want to come back to this in the future, if you want to come back to this treaty, you have to stop this strategic defeat of Russia stuff. You've got to walk away from that, which means you have to stop sending weapons to Ukraine, plain and simple. And if you want a new treaty, because this treaty expires in 2026, because France and the United Kingdom are part of NATO, and you and NATO have come together with a joint policy of the strategic defeat of Russia, any future discussion about Russian strategic nuclear deterrence has to include the nuclear arsenals of France and the United Kingdom, something the United States has not allowed to be on the table ever. Well, Russia says there won't be arms control unless it's on the table. So Russia's imposing its own conditions. And they've also said that anti-ballistic missiles have to be back on the table. And the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the one that was signed in 1987, but Donald Trump pulled out in 2019, that's got to be back on the table. So any future arms control is going to have to be very comprehensive. And there's going to have to be some extraordinary levels of compliance verification so that the Russians feel comfortable with this. They're not, the Russians feel betrayed by the United States, 100%. And let anybody know, this isn't Russia's fault. It's the United States' fault, plain and simple.
Scott, how would you compare the two speeches that were given last week on the same day? The Putin speech in Moscow and then at 1700 local, the Biden speech in Warsaw, which a lot of people were comparing to Ich bin ein Berliner with JFK. I found that comparison wanting.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, Vladimir Putin's address was made by a rational man who was, enunciating rational policy. It was a speech made to the Russian people, the Russian Federal Assembly, and he laid out in honest fashion the state of the union, the state of the nation. A lot of people called it a boring speech. I found nothing boring about it because I listened. People were hoping that he would draw big arrows on a map and announce a new offensive, but he didn't. What he did is he told people exactly what Russia is going to do. People are like, well, no, he didn't. Well, yes, he did. Russia is going to preserve the economic and social security of Novorossiya, Kherson, Zaporizhia, and the Donbass, Donetsk and Lugansk. What that means is to regain control of the totality of the territory and create the conditions for the economic prosperity and social well-being of the population there, which means Russia's going to win the war. Then he said that Russia is going to push back the Ukrainian forces from the borders to a distance that is related to the weapon systems provided to Ukraine. So HIMARS with the new small bomb rocket, 150 kilometers, Russia is going to push Ukraine back 150 kilometers from the border. End of story. He talked about defense industry as if it has been mobilized for a war, which it has. And he has likened the sacrifice being made by the Russian military and the Russian people to that of the people who suffered during the Great Patriotic War. This is a serious conflict. He's not shying away from it. People needed to listen to what he said, and you'd actually know exactly what Russia's going to do. Then we have Biden. First of all, Biden's speech in Warsaw begins with a lie. And I don't mean in Warsaw, I mean in Kiev, the covert mission. Brave Joe Biden, braving the wrath of Khan, Putin. He's going to sneak in like a hero. And he sits down with Zelensky, and then the alarms go off. And Zelensky, that's our normal thing. Don't worry about it, boss. This happens all the time. And Biden's like, yeah, I'm a brave man. I'm here while it's being bombed. But what they didn't tell you is that the Americans actually asked permission. And I won't say permission, but they said, we're coming. Please don't do anything. And the Russians went, don't worry about it. We don't care. And so Russia didn't launch an attack. So the air raid sirens were purely an act of theater by Zelensky. The whole thing was a lie to set up the president being able to say, I just came from Kiev and, and speak highly. And basically the message was that America is behind the Ukrainian government forever. We're going to give them what they need. We're going to win this thing, da-da-da-da-da-da, rah-rah-rah, ooh-rah-rah. And he left. As soon as he left, signals started being sent from the United States to Zelensky saying, yeah, forget what the president said. There is no bottomless pit here. We don't have anything to give you anymore. You're on your own. You're going to die. Find a way out of this. So one leader was rational, cohesive, coherent, with well thought out policies and was honest to his audience. The other president was a liar, irrational, incoherent, and basically everything he said couldn't be believed. It's the exact opposite of what reality is. So there's no comparison. I mean, Joe Biden is a disgrace as an American leader. Vladimir Putin happens to be, I believe, the best leader in modern Russian history and the modern history of not just Russia, but also extending back to the Soviet Union. He's done more for Russia than any other leader. He's taken Russia out of the depths of despair that were the 1990s, and he's built Russia to what it is today. And while it's not perfect, it's better than it was, and they're moving in the right trajectory.
Scott, your comment on the developments today in Bryansk. I know you published a commentary today on Sputnik. Can you elaborate? Do we have any new information coming out of that sabotage terrorist operation from the Ukrainians, which took place in Bryansk?
The only thing I know is that the FSB, the Russian security forces, say they have the situation under control. They've talked about, that there was acts of violence, acts of terrorism. There's wild speculation on social media because apparently, allegedly, some of the attackers posted videos. People have identified who they are and what the organizations are from, and all this stuff. Let's take the attack at face value. And that's all I can do right now. The Russians have said something's happened, but we don't have the nitty gritty details. So I can't sit here and say exactly what happened, et cetera.
Right.
Let's assume it happened. There was no legitimate military target. These aren't hero warriors penetrating lines, going in deep to blow up a train depot or to blow up an ammunition depot or to assassinate a general. This isn't Kelly's Heroes. This isn't the Dirty Dozen. This is terrorists who went across to attack a civilian target. You have to ask yourself, why? Why would they do that? Well, we know in Bakhmut, there's a big battle reaching a conclusion. It's going to not end well for the Ukrainians. We know that the Ukrainians have been begging the West for support, but the West is starting to come back and go, we ain't got nothing to give you. You're sort of on your own. What they need is a distraction and a provocation. So they did something to distract from the looming defeat in Bakhmut, and they carried out a provocation designed to get Russia to overreact. You see, if Russia overreacted, then maybe the West will say, oh my God, we have to step up to the plate now. We have to give them those F-16s that they've been saying they want. We have to give them more tanks. We have to do something because Russia's, escalated this conflict. So I think this was a deliberate provocation designed to get Russia to do what they always threaten to do if targets in Russia were attacked. That is to strike national decision-making centers. This means the office of the presidency, the office of the minister of defense, the parliament would all be struck. And by striking them, they would have escalated this to a whole new level. And they would hope that then NATO, the United States, would re-engage on the issue of providing the support necessary for Ukraine to survive. I think there's some people in Ukraine that are praying for actual direct NATO intervention. And maybe they thought that they could generate that if they provoked Russia into carrying out these kinds of attacks. So again, this is just analysis. I can't sit here and say I know anything because I don't. I know what you guys know, but it's the only thing that makes sense. When you take a look at it, you can't say that this was a legitimate military incursion seeking military target. These were thugs that went in, shot up a school bus, shot at a housewife, burned a building down, terrorized a town, took hostages, basically for the purpose of generating terror, generating fear, generating outrage. And why would you do that? Because you want Russia to do something. It's a cause-effect relationship. So you do something, the cause, and you want the effect to be a Russian overreaction. And I can't tell you what Russia is going to do, but I do believe that because Russia has been very effective at escalation management, that whatever they do is going to be measured. It'll be politically difficult for Putin. There's always pressure to, get the visceral pleasure of revenge. But I don't think Putin plays the revenge game, at least not in the short term. He understands that Russia is poised for a strategic victory against Ukraine and by extension, NATO and the United States. And therefore, he's not going to do anything that gets Russia deviated from the path it's on. They're on the path of victory, and he's going to keep them on the path of victory. That's just my assessment.
I think Stoltenberg is going to have to seek some therapist when all this comes to fruition, because he's been crying crocodile tears, especially with that accent during those press conferences, which is very funny. Scott, two more questions. One is pertaining to that Chinese peace plan that the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs published. I noticed there are some points that the Chinese have been reiterating for some time and sort of applying their Westphalian view of sovereignty and sovereigntism in the world. I noticed that even today, Anthony Blinken came out and said, yeah, there are some good points in there, which even for Anthony Blinken, in my opinion, was a bridge too far, because everybody else in the administration is saying, no, this is it only, favors the Russians, as Biden said. The Polish president, Duda, which surprised me, he said when the plan came out, we can't ignore the propositions of such a great power as China, which was like, whoa. Did you forget who your master is, so to say? What are your thoughts on the proposition that China has made?
Well, China's always made it clear that because of their Westphalian principles, they oppose any action that's deemed to be violation of the sovereignty of a state. So that's why they haven't come out and supported the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But on the other hand, they're realists who know that watching what the collective West is doing vis-a-vis Russia, there, but for the grace of God go I. They know that the West is getting ready to do the same thing to them in Taiwan. So China has to, walk this tightrope. And I think what we're seeing right now with this plan, I think this plan was designed to fail because of the issues of sovereignty. They knew, the Russians just came straight out and said, yeah, no, that first point ain't going to happen. But that's okay, because this wasn't a plan that was supposed to go forward, which is why Poland, the United States, and others, Blinken is saying, oh, this is a good idea. It's not a good idea. But what they're trying to do is keep China engaged on this plan to prevent what's about to happen. Not that China is going to become full team Russia. Westphalian principles won't allow that. But what's happening right now is that China is changing the internal narrative from Russia invaded Ukraine to Russia is being aggressed by the collective West. That this is now not a Russian-Ukrainian issue. This is a Russian collective West issue. And China is saying we're on the side of Russia in this one. The West is a new Cold War, very aggressive, hyper-aggressive. And once China embraces that narrative, then the West has lost China forever on this issue. And so that's why I think the West is desperate to try and keep the Chinese engaged on this. But I don't know how long that can happen, because there's other things at play here, including the continued sanctioning of Russia, the threats. How could you think you're going to lure China away from Russia when you threaten to sanction China? What nation gets threatened and says, that's okay, we'll back down, we'll do whatever you want us to do, especially a nation like China. So, sanctions are like a red flag. China's not going to go along with whatever you're trying to get them to do. Not that I believe China's getting ready to sell munitions to Russia. I don't buy this. Tomorrow the trains could go and everybody goes, look, Chinese rounds, and then I'll be proven wrong. But, this is an artillery-driven war. So artillery becomes the fuel for the war engine. And why would Russia give China the ability to throttle up and throttle down the engine? If Russia is buying artillery ammunition from China, it means that China now controls the pace of operations, or at least has the ability to. So if the United States, next week went, hey, China, we're willing to cut a deal on Taiwan, but we need you to throttle down the ammunition, then Russia's got a problem. Russia, I don't believe, would ever allow the pace of their military operations to be controlled by an outside party, even one as trusted as China. Plus, I believe Russia has actually expanded its munitions production, and they are producing sufficient ammunition to meet the operational requirements of not only the special military operation, but also this new expanded military. They're in the process of building their military up from 900,000 to 1.5 million. So they need more ammunition to stock the units that they're doing to meet contingencies throughout the periphery of Russia, to include a new contingency up on the Kola Peninsula in opposition to Finland, who thinks they want to join NATO.
Yeah, this just confirms for viewers what, if you may recall, what Andrei Martyanov said yesterday about the ramping up of production of the 155 millimeter pieces and others. So yeah, we're definitely seeing that move in the directions being energized on a massive scale. So we have two great sources which just confirm this. Our viewers, as you can see, we're doing great work here. Scott, my final question. Well, I actually had two. I wanted to ask what kind of vodka you were drinking in the embassy, because it looked pretty good, I have to say. Although, in my humble patriotic opinion, Polish vodka is better than Russian vodka, but that's a debate we can have among Slavs. But Scott, my final question.
I think it was Beluga.
Beluga. Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'll go along with Beluga. Not bad. Not bad. Stolichna is out the window, but Beluga is good. Scott, I know you're engaged in things that you were engaged in a similar fashion before the Iraq War, to get arms control deals going, to bring the Russians and the Americans, and hence the Eastern and the Western world, to some sort of accord. Your book is being translated into Russian. We know that. How can best people support your work? We have the link in the description box, Scott Ritter Extra, where everything is posted. But any venues where people can come out, support you, organize meetings, just let our viewers know. What's the game plan?
If you go to scottritterextra.com, we do publish when we nail down a future venue. So we have one in Oakland later this month, I think the 18th, 19th, and 20th. And then we have one scheduled for Austin, Texas from the 28th through the 30th. And as more happen, we'll publish them and all that. For the moment, the best way to support, if you're interested in, and there's no requirement, scottritterextra.com does not have a paywall. Everything on there is free access, but there is the ability to subscribe to the Substack channel voluntarily. And believe me, that's a great assistance. I'll give you an example. I went down to the Rage Against the War Machine rally on February 19th, and I had to pay for that out of my own pocket. And 3 nights hotel in Washington D.C., meals, and transport. It comes to a pretty penny. And then I was invited to attend the Defender of the Fatherland Day reception at the Russian embassy, and everybody's like, "Well, why would you go there?" I don't know. Speak to Anatoly Antonov, the Russian ambassador who used to be the chief negotiator for New START. To have a chance to talk to Yevgeny Babkin, the defense attaché, who is a strategic rocket forces officer with experience with the SS-25 mobile missile. When START is the most important thing, why wouldn't I want to have face-to-face conversation with them and other Russian military officers to learn more, and diplomats to learn more about the Russian position? Wow. But I couldn't afford it because I had basically used up all my resources for travel for the month of February. But because of people who support through Substack and stuff, we were able to generate the funds that enabled me to go there, have this meeting, and it produced the 2 articles. One, Give Peace a Chance, and the other one about the new McCarthyism, about Russophobia. And if people, a lot of people say they love those articles. They think those are great articles. Well, those articles wouldn't have happened without your support. And so if people want more articles like that, or you want me to come on this show, I don't get compensated for this. I don't want to get compensated for this. But this is time. The fact that I'm on this show right now, I'm not writing an article that generates income. So to compensate for that, people need to provide support so that I am fiscally liberated from the constraints of having to write the article, and I can sit here and have this conversation. So that's the best way to do it. As we move forward, understand that my book is being published in Russia, which probably means that I am going to Russia to do a book tour. And the book tour isn't about selling books. I know the Russian publisher wants it to be about selling books. The book tour is about initiating dialogue between Americans. I'm going to go there. I'm going to have a documentary film crew. We're going to collect images, and we're going to come back and we're going to make a documentary film that I will then take around the country to introduce arms control and the Russian perspective to the American people, and try and get this dialogue building and trying to get support for arms control that hopefully will manifest itself in a 1 million-person rally on June 22nd, 2024 in Central Park and elsewhere, to send a signal to American politicians who seek to be elected in November 2024 that arms control must be on the agenda, that no American is going to vote for a politician who says we don't believe in arms control, we're not making it our top priority. And when we do that, we will have specific funding needs. And at that time, we will probably set up, GoFundMe pages or things of that nature, so people can make specific donations to support that specific activity.
Well, Scott, when Nixon went to Moscow in 1972, I think this was May 1972, where he also stopped over, right? He stopped in Warsaw. That was a second trip, first as vice president in the 1950s, and then that was actually the first visit by an American president in Poland, 1972, Richard Nixon. So I'm suggesting here, obviously, that if you go to Russia, please remember to make a stop over in Warsaw. I hope we can get things going on that end too. We'd love to see you in Poland. So I hope that'll, generate momentum in Poland for more rational thought on the East-West.
I don't want to be arrested when I arrive in Poland, though. That's it.
No, I think by then we should have a different government, if unless Armageddon sits in, God forbid.
Let me just make one last comment, because I see some of the comments here. On ScottRitterExtra.com, we are going to have the ability for people to purchase an autographed book. So for people who want an autographed book and you live in the United States, there will be that ability. If you don't live in the United States, we'll find a way to make it happen. So, if you can't make it to one of these events and you want a book and you want that book to be autographed, we will find a way to make it happen.
If you can't make it to Oakland, maybe you can make it to Moscow, or you can make it to Warsaw. We'll see. Scott, thanks so much for your time, for your insight. Hope to do this again sometime in the future. And once again, Scott Ritter Extra, give us a like, give our channel a sub, and hopefully we'll see Scott in a few days, maybe in a few weeks, to talk about the developments in Ukraine and other broader issues of the day. Scott, once again, thank you and have a good day.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Take care.